The last invoice of the night always felt less like a closure and more like a fresh wound, a paper-thin testament to a life lived in the margins of other people's luxury. For Ilara Vance, the crisp white rectangle was a stark, recurring reminder of the unbridgeable chasm between the world she served and the one she inhabited. Here, inside the polished mahogany and muted golden glow of Aurelia, an institution of New York fine dining, a single meal, an ephemeral pleasure, cost more than her month's rent for an apartment that perpetually smelled of damp and her neighbor's curry. Outside, beyond the thick, sound-proofed windows, the sirens of a relentless city sang their familiar, weary lullaby, a sound that had long ago ceased to be an alarm and had become the city's very heartbeat. A low hiss, sharp and venomous as a striking snake, cut through the controlled chaos of the kitchen, clearing down for the night. The numbers need to sing by Friday, Leo. I don't care what aria you have to teach them. I want a goddamn opera. Make it happen. It was Marcus Thorne, the restaurant's general manager, his silhouette a slick, predatory shape against the frosted glass of his office door. He was a man tailored to within an inch of his life, his ambition and his cruelty tucked neatly into the sharp creases of his trousers. Ilara, stacking dessert plates with the practiced, silent economy of motion that comes from 15 years in the service industry, felt the words slide under her skin and settle there like splinters of ice. They were wrong. Like a sour note in a symphony, they promised a dissonance, a deep and troubling wrongness that she was profoundly too tired to decipher. Ilara was 42, a woman whose face was a delicate canvas etched with the fine lines of deferred dreams and quiet, unyielding resilience. She had once painted real canvases, vast landscapes filled with bold, vibrant strokes of impossible sunsets and stormy skies. She dreamt in cadmium yellow and cerulean blue. But life, in its indifferent cruelty, had handed her a silver tray and a starched black apron instead of a brush and an easel. A decade spent caring for her ailing mother, whose Parkinson's had stolen her grace and then her savings, had painted over Ilara's own ambitions with layers of grim, monochrome necessity. She moved through the dining room with a spectral grace that belied the chronic ache in her feet and the deep, settled weariness in her bones. Her observations were sharp, honed by years of reading the subtle language of the wealthy, the flicker of annoyance in a banker's eye, the feigned warmth of a loveless couple, the desperate loneliness of a solitary diner. Her smile was a professionally calibrated shield, a pleasant, unobtrusive piece of the restaurant's decor. To the patrons of Aurelia, she was a ghost. A pair of disembodied hands that refilled water glasses with Evian and cleared away the artfully arranged remnants of their indulgence. They saw the uniform, not the woman. They never saw the woman who knew that the true stories of this city weren't in the society pages, but in the furtive glances exchanged over $1,000 bottles of wine, the desperate conversations whispered when they thought no one was listening, and the things people left behind. Tonight, the man at table 7 was one such story. He was older, perhaps late 50s, dressed in a tweed jacket that had seen better decades and a pair of worn leather shoes that no Aurelia regular would be caught dead in. He didn't radiate the aggressive, performative wealth of the tech moguls or the bored, inherited aristocracy of the old money families that usually populated Aurelia's plush banquettes. He was quiet, almost melancholic, his gaze drifting towards the rain-streaked window more often than his plate of exorbitantly priced, pan-seared sea bass. He nursed a single glass of Macallan 18, and when Alara had discreetly refilled his water, his eyes had met hers for a fleeting second. They were gray, tired eyes, but they were deeply intelligent. He saw her. He didn't look through her. This small act of acknowledgement was so unusual, it was disarming. He ate slowly, methodically, as if the food were a necessary fuel rather than a source of pleasure. He paid the bill in cash, pulling a thick wad of notes from a wallet Alara glimpsed only for a moment. He left a tip that was correct to the precise penny. No more, no less. The gesture of a man who dealt in numbers and logic, not grand, performative gestures. He was utterly unremarkable, and in a place like Aurelia, a temple of ostentation that made him a profound curiosity. As Alara cleared his table, her gloved fingers brushed against something solid and unfamiliar, lodged deep between the velvet cushions of the banquette. It was a wallet, a man's wallet, made of dark, supple calfskin leather, worn to a soft, buttery sheen at the edges. It felt heavy in her palm, not just with its contents, but with history, with years of being carried in a pocket close to a man's body. Her first instinct, a jolt of pure, unadulterated procedure forged by years of training, was to take it directly to Marcus. But the memory of his sibilant whisper on the phone, "The numbers need to sing," stopped her cold. She pictured his manicured hands, the predatory gleam in his eyes as he'd once confiscated a junior waitress's $100 tip from a grateful tourist. She knew, with a certainty that settled like a block of ice in her stomach, what would happen. He would open it, his thin lips curling into a self-satisfied smirk, and its contents would vanish into the restaurant's nebulous, lost and found, a black hole from which nothing, not even a cheap pair of sunglasses, ever returned. Tucking the wallet into the deep pocket of her apron, she felt its solid weight against her hip, a secret and a sudden, heavy burden. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of forced smiles and autopilot actions. The weight in her pocket was a constant reminder of the decision she had yet to make. Finally, in the cramped, sour-smelling employee locker room, under the flickering fluorescent light that made everyone look ill and haunted, She allowed herself to open it. Her hands trembled, slightly. She wasn't looking for a reward, she told herself, but for a name, an address, a way to circumvent the casual, systemic corruption she knew was as much a part of Aurelia's foundation as its marble columns. The scent of old leather and something else, something faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco, filled the small space. Inside, there were no credit cards. None. This was the first shock. In this world of plastic and digital transactions, a man carrying only cash was an anachronism. A thick, formidable stack of $100 bills sat nestled in the main compartment. She didn't count it, couldn't bring herself to, but her breath hitched in her throat. It was easily $5,000, maybe $6,000. The number was an electric shock to her system. It was a solution. It was the answer to a prayer she was too proud to ever utter. $6,000. It would fix the screaming transmission on her dying Honda Civic. It would pay for the next 3 months of the specialized physical therapy her mother's insurance refused to cover. It would silence the increasingly threatening calls from the collection agency about the hospital bill from her mother's last fall. It would allow her to breathe, just for a moment, for the first time in what felt like a decade. The temptation was a physical thing, a tightening in her chest, a dizzying, cinematic vision of a life with one less jagged, terrifying edge. She could take it. The man had no credit cards, no way to be easily traced. Who would ever know? He was just another rich man to whom this sum was likely a pittance. Then she saw it, tucked into a faded, yellowing sleeve behind the cash. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a photograph, its corners soft and rounded with time and touch. It was a picture of a woman with a brilliant, uninhibited smile, her head thrown back in laughter, her eyes crinkling at the corners with pure, undiluted joy. She was on a beach, the wind catching her hair, the ocean a blurry backdrop of blue and white. There was a raw, unguarded love in that picture, a captured millisecond of happiness so profound it felt sacred. Elara felt like a trespasser, a voyeur peering into the heart of a stranger's life. This wallet wasn't just a container for money. It was a shrine. The man at table 7 wasn't just a quiet, unassuming diner. He was a man carrying a ghost. The decision, when it came, was instantaneous and absolute. The money, a moment ago a dazzling object of temptation, was now just paper, an insignificant detail. The photograph was the heart of it. This was a man's soul, and she was holding it in her hands. She carefully closed the wallet, its warmth now feeling less like a burden and more like a trust placed in her hands, and slipped it deep into her purse, zipping it shut. She would find him herself, whatever the cost. Her resolve was tested the moment she stepped out of the locker room. Marcus was there, leaning against the wall with a studied casualness, a sickly sweet smile plastered on his face. He was blocking her exit. "Find something interesting on your way out, Elara?" he purred, his eyes flicking down to her apron, which now lay flat, then to her purse. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had cameras everywhere, both electronic and human. Leo, the sycophantic host, had likely reported it the second she deviated from protocol. Marcus watched everything. He was the petty, paranoid tyrant of a small, gilded kingdom. "A guest left their reading glasses," she lied, her voice a marvel of calm she did not feel. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I was going to drop them at the front desk." "Is that so?" He pushed himself off the wall, smoothly invading her personal space. His cologne was overpowering, a cheap, aggressive imitation of something expensive. "Because Leo at the host stand seemed to think you found a wallet at table 7. A man's wallet. A heavy wallet," he said. "It's restaurant policy, Elara. You know this. All found items are to be turned over to management immediately." His voice was soft, reasonable, but his eyes were hard little stones. This was the moment. The line in the sand. The pivot point on which her immediate future would turn. She could capitulate, hand over the shrine, and let the quiet man's memory of his laughing wife be desecrated by this vulture. She could walk away, poorer, but employed. Or she could do the thing her gut, her soul, was screaming at her to do. "I didn't find a wallet, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but firm. His smile tightened, the thin veneer of bonhomie vanishing to reveal the cold, hard steel beneath. "Don't be a fool, Elara. Don't play these games with me. You think you're better than everyone else here? The noble waitress? Our little saint of the service station? Let me tell you something about this city. Nobility gets you a spot on the bread line and a cardboard sign. Now, give it to me." He held out his hand, palm up, an emperor demanding tribute. Elara met his gaze. For the first time in a long time, her professional shield, the carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality, dropped. It fell away to reveal the core of iron she'd forged over years of quiet indignities, swallowed insults, and soul-crushing injustices. "No." The word hung in the air between them, small but utterly immovable. Marcus's face flushed a deep, ugly, mottled red. He took a step back, his expression shifting from anger to one of theatrical, condescending pity. "Your choice," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "But when you're out on the street, remember this conversation. Remember that I tried to help you." The threat was absolute, the consequence crystal clear. The next day, Elara called in sick, her stomach churning with a potent cocktail of fear and resolve. She used the name she'd found on a small, exquisitely embossed card tucked away in a hidden pocket of the wallet. Julian Croft, and the address of a discreet, imposing office building in Midtown. Finding him was a monumental risk. She was defying her boss, a man she knew to be vindictive and powerful within their small world. She was almost certainly sacrificing her job, the only thing keeping her and her mother from financial ruin. But the image of the smiling woman in the photograph, and the profound, bottomless sadness she'd seen in Julian Croft's eyes, propelled her forward. She was no longer just returning a wallet. She was on a mission. She arrived at a building with no name on its facade, just a number 914 carved into the polished black granite. The lobby was a silent, intimidating cathedral of gray marble and brushed steel. The air itself seemed to be filtered of all emotion. The receptionist, a woman with the severe geometric elegance of a queen in a chess game, looked Ilara's simple coat and worn but clean shoes up and down with an expression of profound, soul-withering disapproval. "I don't have an appointment," Ilara began, her voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous, echoing space. "But I found something that belongs to Mr. Julian Croft." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction of a millimeter. "Mr. Croft doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Ever." "I understand," Ilara persisted, her courage warring with her intimidation. "But this is personal." She held up the wallet, a humble offering in this temple of wealth. A flicker of something surprise, curiosity, protocol crossed the receptionist's icy features. She picked up a sleek, minimalist phone, her voice a low, deferential murmur. A moment later, she nodded, her eyes reassessing Ilara with a new, grudging respect. "Take the private elevator on the right to the penthouse. His executive assistant will meet you." The elevator ascended in unnerving, frictionless silence, opening directly into a space that was less an office and more a curated museum of understated, terrifying power. The walls were lined with original Rothkos and de Koonings, their chaotic energy contained by the room's severe, minimalist calm. A single massive desk of what looked like petrified wood sat before a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a god's-eye view of Central Park. A calm, impeccably dressed woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe chignon greeted her before she had taken 2 steps into the room. "I'm Amelia Vance. You have something for Mr. Croft?" Ilara, startled by the coincidence of their shared surname, simply handed her the wallet. Amelia took it, her expression utterly unreadable. She opened it, her professional gaze sweeping over the contents. She saw the cash, her expression not changing a whit, but her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second longer on the photograph. She looked at Ilara, a long, appraising stare that seemed to peel back layers. "Please, wait here." She disappeared through a set of massive, soundproofed oak doors. Ilara stood alone in the vast space, feeling like a common garden sparrow that had accidentally flown into a bald eagle's eyrie. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. A few minutes, which stretched into an eternity. Later, the doors opened again. It was him, the man from Table 7, Julian Croft. But he was transformed. The worn, comfortable tweed jacket was gone, replaced by a suit of such exquisite, dark gray tailoring that it seemed to have been woven from shadows and consolidated financial power. The melancholy was still there, deep in his eyes, but now it was contained within an aura of formidable, unshakable authority. This was not just a sad, quiet man. This was a king in his throne room. "You are the waitress from Aurelia," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Yes, sir. Elara Vance." He held the wallet in his hands, turning it over and over as if it were a strange artifact. "I received a call from my security chief this morning. The manager of Aurelia, a Mr. Thorne, reported that an employee had stolen a guest's wallet. He gave them your name." The blood drained from Elara's face. Marcus had called the police. Of course he had. He wasn't just going to fire her. He was going to ruin her. Julian watched her reaction, his expression unreadable. "Amelia has already handled the report. But tell me, Ms. Vance, he said you refused to give it to him. Why?" The question hung in the air. How could he possibly know the details of their confrontation? He has a reputation," she stammered, her voice betraying her shock. "I didn't trust him with it." "I see." Julian opened the wallet and looked at the photograph. A wave of raw, unguarded emotion washed over his features, so profound and so private that Elara felt she had to look away, to give him the dignity of his grief. "This was my wife, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with a loss that was still achingly fresh. "She passed away 2 years ago. This wallet, it was the last gift she ever gave me. She said the worn leather suited my professorial disguise." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The money is just paper. This," he tapped the photograph with his index finger, "is everything." He looked back at Elara, his eyes clear and impossibly intense. "You could have taken the cash, $6,400 to be exact. No one would have known. You could have just dropped the wallet in a mailbox, anonymously. But you brought it here, in person, knowing you would lose your job and risk being accused of theft. Why?" Elara thought for a moment, the answer forming not from her head, but from a deeper place, from the very core of her being. "Because it didn't feel like it belonged to a rich man," she said slowly. "It felt like it belonged to a man who was missing someone. It was personal. And it felt wrong for anyone else, especially for a man like Marcus Thorne, to touch it." A slow, genuine smile spread across Julian's face, a warmth that seemed to thaw the glacial iciness of the room. He reached into the wallet, pulled out a thick stack of bills, at least $1,000, and held it out to her. A finder's fee, a reward for your extraordinary integrity. It was a lifeline. It was the physical therapy, the car repair, the rent. It was a reprieve. But looking at the photograph he had just called everything, taking money for its return, felt like a desecration. It would turn a deeply human act into a crude transaction. It would make her no better than Marcus, just with a higher price. "No, thank you, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I didn't do it for a reward. I just did what was right." He studied her for a long, silent moment, his gaze so penetrating it felt as if he were looking not at her, but through her, into the very architecture of her character. He slowly withdrew his hand. "Very well, Ms. Vance. Thank you for returning my wife to me." As she turned to leave, the full weight of her unemployment and Marcus's inevitable ongoing retribution settling upon her, Julian spoke again. "One moment." He scribbled something on a small, thick piece of cardstock from his desk, a heavy, cream-colored card that felt important in her hand. "Should you ever find yourself in need of a different perspective on your former place of employment, call this number. Ask for Amelia." He handed her the card. It held only a phone number and a short, cryptic sequence of characters. INV 714. Elara took it. A polite, but, she thought, ultimately empty gesture. A rich man's meaningless platitude to assuage his conscience. She had no idea that she was holding not a business card, but a key that was about to unlock the deep, festering rot in the heart of Aurelia and utterly change the course of her life. The retribution was as swift and merciless as she had feared. Her key card didn't work when she arrived for her shift the next day. Her locker had been cleared out. Its contents, a worn copy of a Mary Oliver poetry book, a faded photo of her mother before the illness, a spare pair of orthopedic shoes piled in a sad, humiliating little heap on the floor of the locker room. Marcus stood there, arms crossed, the picture of smug, triumphant satisfaction. "Your services are no longer required, Elara," he said, the words dripping with a thick, false regret. "We can't have employees who don't respect restaurant policy or management, and we certainly can't have thieves on staff." The accusation, so bald-faced and hypocritical, stole her breath. "I returned the wallet to its owner," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Did you?" Marcus sneered. "Or did you get caught trying to pawn it off? That's what I'll be telling anyone who calls for a reference. Don't forget your things." He gestured to the pile on the floor and walked away, whistling softly. He had not just fired her for her integrity. He had weaponized it against her, twisting her good deed into a crime to cover his own. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. But the dead-eyed certainty in his expression, the sheer confidence of his malice, told her something more. He wasn't just fraying her out of spite. He was afraid. Afraid of what she knew, or what she might find out. His venomous whisper on the phone echoed in her mind. The numbers need to sing. Desperation, Ilara discovered, was not a sudden flood, but a cold, creeping tide. She spent the next 2 weeks in a soul-crushing cycle of online applications and fruitless interviews. The world of fine dining in New York was a small, incestuous village. A dismissal from a place like Aurelia without a recommendation was a black mark. And Marcus's poisonous whispers had clearly done their work. She was overqualified for diners, underconnected for the city's other elite establishments. Rejection emails piled up. The rent was due. The final eviction notice was taped to her door, its stark red letters a scream of impending doom. The city, once a landscape of weary possibility, was now a wall of silently, firmly closed doors. On the third Friday, sitting in her small, cold apartment with the eviction notice clutched in her hand, her eyes fell on the heavy, cream-colored card Julian Croft had given her. It lay on her nightstand, a stark, white rectangle in the gloom. INV 7. It was a meaningless string of characters, likely a file number, a private joke, a rich man's whim. But it was also the only thread she had left to pull. What really did she have left to lose? Her job was gone. Her reputation was in tatters. Her apartment would be next. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. A voice answered on the first ring, not a bubbly receptionist, but the calm, cool, professional tones of Amelia Vance. Yes? My name is Ilara Vance, she began, her own voice a reedy, unfamiliar tremor. Mr. Croft gave me this number. I was fired. My manager is telling people I'm a thief. There was a pause on the other end, not of surprise, but of quiet, focused contemplation. We are aware of that, Ms. Vance. Mr. Croft anticipated it. He is a man who believes that actions have consequences, both for good and for ill. The words sent a strange jolt, a mixture of fear and hope, through her. Anticipated? What do you mean? The number he gave you, INV 714, it wasn't random. He chose it specifically for you. Tell me, in your time at Aurelia, did you ever notice anything unusual about the invoices? Specifically, with the suppliers for high-cost items? Ilara's mind, sluggish with despair, suddenly kicked into high gear. The whispered phone call, Marcus's consuming fear. She thought back, sifting through years of mundane, peripheral details stored away in her memory. The deliveries, the kitchen chatter, the constant complaints from the brilliant but temperamental head chef, Antoine. And then, a memory surfaced, small but sharp and distinct. A few weeks ago, a massive charge on an invoice for premium Caspian sea caviar. She remembered it vividly because Chef Antoine had thrown a spectacular, pan-clattering tantrum for days about the slimy, salty mud he was being forced to serve. It was, he had screamed at Marcus in the middle of the kitchen, poor quality domestic roe from a farm in Tennessee, a far, far cheaper product. The cost on the invoice, which she had glimpsed on Marcus's desk, was astronomical, nearly $20,000. At the time, she'd dismissed it as the usual obscene restaurant markup. But now, "The caviar," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The invoices were for Caspian, but the product we served was domestic. It was from Tennessee." Amelia's voice on the other end was suddenly sharp with focus. "Can you prove that? Is there documentation?" "I don't. I mean, the chefs would know. The supplier, a company I'd never heard of before, Viridian Foods. They always delivered late at night, through the back service entrance. Marcus always handled those deliveries himself. No one else was allowed to sign for them. He said it was a special arrangement." "Stay where you are, Ms. Vance," Amelia said, a new, unmistakable urgency in her tone. "A car will be there in 15 minutes. We have a lot to discuss." The car was a black, anonymous sedan with tinted windows that whisked her away from her world of looming eviction and into the heart of the city's financial district. A canyon of glass and steel where the fate of nations was decided in hushed tones. She was brought not to Julian's art-filled penthouse, but to a different, even more discreet office, a place that hummed with the quiet, intense energy of data, law, and analysis. Julian Croft was there, along with Amelia and two other stern-faced individuals who introduced themselves as forensic accountants. A large, interactive screen on the wall displayed a complex, bewildering web of shell corporations and bank transfers. At the very center of the tangled web was a name: Viridian Foods. "Aurelia was my wife's favorite restaurant," Julian began, his voice low and laced with a cold, controlled anger that was far more frightening than any shouting. "We had our first date there. I proposed to her at table 7. After she died, I bought the controlling interest in the hospitality group that owns it. I preserved it, I thought, as a tribute to her. I trusted the management I hired to run it with the same integrity she embodied. But over the last year, the profits began to decline, even as the prices went up, and the quality, according to trusted sources, went down. I started asking questions. The answers I received were unsatisfactory." He gestured to the screen, a digital monument to greed. "Your manager, Marcus Thorne, wasn't just skimming from the tips and bullying his staff, Ms. Vance. He was using the restaurant, my wife's restaurant, as the centerpiece of a sophisticated money laundering operation. He set up ghost suppliers, like Viridian Foods, to bill the restaurant for premium goods that were never delivered. He would approve the fraudulent payments. The money would flow into a shell corporation he controlled, and then be funneled offshore. The caviar was just one of dozens of such transactions. Fine wines, truffles, Japanese A5 Wagyu beef, all phantom products that existed only on his invoices. Elara stared at the screen, dumbfounded. The scale of the deception was staggering. "The numbers need to sing," she murmured, the phrase finally clicking into its ugly, criminal place. It wasn't about balancing the books. It was about orchestrating a symphony of fraud. "Precisely," Julian said, his eyes hard. He was stealing millions. From me, from the restaurant's legacy, and from every employee he underpaid and exploited to cover his tracks. I came to the restaurant that night to see the rot up close for myself. I had my suspicions. The data pointed to a significant bleed, but I needed a catalyst. I needed proof that the corruption wasn't just financial, but moral. I needed to know if there was anyone left in that building worth saving. He looked directly at her, his gaze holding hers. "I intentionally left that wallet, Ilara. The cash was a test, a crude one, perhaps, but a direct and effective one. I needed to see what the people who worked in my wife's favorite place were made of. Your manager failed spectacularly. You," he paused, his expression softening slightly, "you did not." The invoice number, INV 714, was a breadcrumb he had left specifically for her, a clue he hoped her sharp, observant nature would lead her to question. It was a test within a test, a silent interview for a job she didn't know existed, and she had passed without even knowing she was being graded. "We have the financial data," Amelia interjected, her tone all business, pulling Ilara's attention back to the grim reality. "We can trace every dollar. But to build an airtight, public case for fraud and shut him down decisively, we need to connect Marcus directly to the physical deception. We need an inside witness to testify about the discrepancy between the invoices and the actual goods received. Chef Antoine and the others are too afraid of him. He has them all on precarious work visas, a fact he lords over them constantly. But you are a different story. He has already done his worst to you. You have nothing left to lose." It was a stark, brutal assessment, and it was the absolute truth. Marcus had already taken her job, her savings, her reputation, and nearly her home. All she had left was the truth. "What do you need me to do?" Ilara asked, her fear of the last few weeks crystallizing into a galvanizing anger. The plan they devised was audacious, theatrical, and utterly terrifying. It was a showdown worthy of the city itself. 2 nights later, during Aurelia's busiest Saturday dinner service, the grand oak doors swung open. But it wasn't a throng of wealthy diners who entered. It was Julian Croft, dressed not in his professorial disguise, but in a suit that screamed power. He was flanked by Amelia, 2 stone-faced detectives from the NYPD's white-collar crime unit, and a severe-looking agent from the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. The restaurant, buzzing with the happy din of the city's elite, fell into a sudden, stunned silence. Patrons lowered their forks. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet in the corner faltered, a violin screeching to a halt. The entire staff froze mid-stride, trays held aloft. Marcus, in his element, schmoozing a table of investment bankers, turned, a brilliant false smile plastered on his face. The smile dissolved as he saw Julian. His face blanched to the color of bleached bone. In that single, shattering moment, he saw his entire, carefully constructed world of lies and theft evaporate into thin air. "Marcus," Julian's voice was quiet, yet it carried across the entire, silent dining room, as sharp and clear as the sound of breaking glass. "I believe you have some accounting discrepancies to explain to my associates." Marcus sputtered, his mind scrambling, trying to regain his footing, to retreat behind his smarmy managerial persona. "Mr. Croft, what a surprise. I don't know what you're talking about. Is there a problem with your table?" "The problem isn't with my table, Marcus. It's with your books," Julian said, his voice lethally calm. Amelia stepped forward and handed a thick, damning file to one of the detectives. "Let's start with invoice 714 for $20,000 worth of premium Caspian sea caviar. Perhaps you could show my guests from the IRS the current inventory. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to see it." Sheer animal panic flared in Marcus's eyes. He looked around wildly, a cornered rat seeking an escape route, an ally, anyone, and then his eyes locked on her. Elara, standing near the entrance, her expression calm, steady, and resolute. In that moment, he understood everything. She hadn't just been a noble fool. She had been the quiet, unassuming instrument of his complete and utter downfall. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, losing all its cultivated smoothness, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at her. "This is because of you, you lying, scheming bitch. You set me up." "That's enough, Mr. Thorne," the lead detective said, stepping forward, his voice heavy with boredom. "You're under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit tax fraud." As they cuffed him, the facade of the powerful, charming manager crumbled completely, revealing the craven, terrified thief beneath. The entire dining room watched in silent, rapt attention as he was led away, his final, pathetic, sputtering protests swallowed by the closing doors. In the stunned, electric aftermath, Julian addressed the staff and the remaining patrons. He spoke of his wife, Eleanor, of the restaurant's intended legacy of warmth, excellence, and integrity. He spoke of the betrayal that had been allowed to fester in its heart. He assured the shell-shocked staff their jobs were safe, that their back pay for skimmed tips would be restored, and that a new, honest management team, led by Chef Antoine, was already being put in place. Then he walked over to Elara. In front of everyone, the wealthy patrons and the humble busboys alike, he put a hand gently on her shoulder. "Integrity, honesty, courage," he said, his voice resonating with a deep, unshakable conviction. These are not qualities that show up on a balance sheet, but they are the most valuable assets any enterprise can have. Ms. Vance has reminded me of that, at great personal cost to herself. He looked at her, and his next words were not a reward, but a revolution. I don't want to offer you your old job back, Elara. That would be an insult to your character and a waste of your talent. I have a vast hospitality group with hotels and restaurants around the world, and it has become painfully clear to me that I have a serious, systemic problem with corruption. I need someone with unimpeachable integrity, with an eye for the details others miss, and with the quiet courage to speak truth to power. I need an ombudsman, a new department of one, an internal auditor who reports directly and only to me. He paused, letting the staggering offer settle in the quiet room. I'm not offering you a job, Elara. I'm offering you a new business. Your business will be to protect my business from the inside out. I will fund your education, a business degree from any university you choose. I will provide you with a team of your own choosing, and I will give you the authority to investigate any part of my organization, anywhere in the world, without interference. Your only duty will be to the truth. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Elara's eyes, not of sadness or even relief, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of cosmic justice. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about being seen, truly seen, for the person she had always been, hidden for so long behind a starched apron and a polite, invisible smile. 6 months later, Elara Vance walked through the newly renovated and renamed Eleanor's. The oppressive, toxic atmosphere she remembered was gone, replaced by a sense of lightness, creative energy, and genuine professional pride. She wore a tailored suit that fit her perfectly, a testament to her new role, but she greeted the busboys and the chefs by name. The old, easy camaraderie still intact. Her mother was in a state-of-the-art care facility, smiling more than she had in years. The eviction notice was a distant, laughable memory. Elara was there for a surprise inspection, a core part of her new methodology. But what she saw warmed her to her soul. A young waiter, new to the job, found a diamond earring that had slipped off a patron's earlobe onto the floor. Without a moment's hesitation, without looking around to see if he was being watched, he ran out of the restaurant and down the block to return it to its grateful owner. Elara smiled, a real, uncalibrated smile. The system hadn't just been purged, it had been reformed. The foundation was no longer profit at all costs, but integrity at all times. A dropped wallet, a faded photograph, and a single, quiet act of decency had not only returned a billionaire his most prized possession, it had allowed him to rebuild his entire empire's soul. And in the process, it had given a forgotten, middle-aged waitress the one thing she had stopped allowing herself to even dream of, a canvas big enough for her character, and the vibrant, bold colors to finally paint her own masterpiece. Faith, she thought, was not about believing in a higher power, but in the quiet, unyielding, and ultimately world-changing power of doing the right thing, especially when you think no one is watching.